Okay, so let's take a look at arguing about God. Um, this is a famous, maybe notorious argument in the history of philosophy made by a philosopher, I believe, of the 11th century, Anselm of Canterbury. I think it's Anselm of Canterbury. It doesn't matter. It's a notorious argument. It's called the ontological argument, and in a way, it's like a rite of passage for anybody who's doing philosophy, reading philosophy. And it continues to be an object of some concern to contemporary theologians and philosophers. I think, for the person who's engaging with it for the first time, it may seem it may seem laughable, and maybe it is. I don't know, but I wanted to give you an example of theological argument, arguing about God, and not arguing politically about God, arguing rationally about God, arguing on the basis of reason alone about God, which is something that people don't do, I think, a lot. They argue in other ways. But this argument is supposed to establish, from Anselm's point of view, I suppose, to any rational person, without faith, without any sort of acculturation or prior commitments, trying to establish the existence of what he conceives of, at least, as God. But let's read through it. It might help. Truly, there is a God, which is, of course, the conclusion that he's trying to reach, not something he can take for granted. Truly, there is a God, although the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And so, Lord, do you, who do give understanding to faith, give me, so far as you knowest it to be profitable, to understand that you are as we believe, and that you are at that which we believe. And indeed, we believe that you are a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. Okay, that's really the first, that is the assumption. That is the premise of the argument, that we believe that God is a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. That's the key, really, I believe, to the whole argument. That we can conceive of, that we believe, we can conceive of a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. Or is there no such nature, since the fool has said in his heart there is no God? But at any rate, this very fool, when he hears of this being of which I speak, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, understands what he hears. And what he understands is in his understanding, although he does not understand it to exist. So I suppose the beginning of the argument is to say that anyone, when they understand that phrase, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, can hold that idea in their mind. They can think of such a being. That is, when they hear somebody articulate it, a being greater than which nothing can be conceived, they understand it. So they have it in their intellect. Even if they do not think that it actually exists, they can conceive of it. He continues, for it is one thing for an object to be in the understanding, and another to understand that the object exists. It's a simple distinction, that we can conceive of things that we either don't know whether they exist, or whether we actually don't even think that they exist, where we can be sure that they don't exist. It's one thing for an idea to exist in the understanding. It's another thing for that thing of which it's an idea to actually exist. His example is this: when a painter first conceives of what he will afterwards perform, he has it in his understanding. But he does not yet understand it to be, because he has not yet performed it. So we can think of, say, we're going to draw a picture. We can conceive of the thing that we're going to draw in our mind, but it does not yet exist. He's just trying to make this distinction between something existing in the mind and something existing per se clear. He continues, but after he has made the painting, he both has it in his understanding and he understands that it exists because he has made it. Hence, even the fool is convinced that something exists in the understanding, at least, than which nothing greater can be conceived. That is, the fool is the atheist to Anselm, but even the fool who doesn't believe that God exists believes that this idea of the being nothing greater than which can exist exists in his understanding. For when he hears of this, he continues, he understands it, and whatever is understood exists in the understanding. That is, the being nothing greater than which can be conceived does exist, at least as an idea in the understanding, something we can think of. And here's the key move then. He says, and assuredly that, than which nothing greater can be conceived, cannot exist in the understanding alone. That's the key move, right? Well, we can think of anything. And just because we think of it doesn't mean that it actually exists. But this idea, this conception to Anselm is different. It's special. He says, assuredly, that than which nothing greater can be conceived cannot exist in the understanding alone. That is, he believes that it can't be the case that it exists only as an idea and not exist per se. Why not? He says, for suppose it exists in the understanding alone, then it can be conceived to exist in reality, which is greater. So we have this idea of the being nothing greater than which can be conceived. Well, suppose that it's only an idea. That is, it's an idea that can exist in the intellect, but it doesn't exist in reality. Well, we could also we could also conceive of a being that existed in reality, a being nothing greater than which can exist that also existed in reality, and that would be greater than our original idea. He ends by saying, therefore, and this is the sign that it's the conclusion, if that than which nothing greater can be conceived exists in the understanding alone, the very being than which nothing greater can be conceived is one than which a greater can be conceived. That is, if it exists as an idea in the intellect of a being nothing greater than which can be conceived, but it doesn't exist in reality, well, we could conceive of it existing in reality, therefore it would be greater. That idea would be greater, but the original idea was the being nothing greater than which can be conceived. So it involves a contradiction. It is, we would both be thinking of a being greater than which nothing can be conceived, and at the same time be conceiving of a being, that same idea of which a greater can be conceived. So he's using the principle of non-contradiction. That is, that we can't be thinking the same thing being true and false at the same time. So he says, but obviously this is impossible. Hence there is doubt that there exists a being, then that's got to be a misprint. I think it should say, hence there is no doubt that there exists a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, and it exists both in the understanding and reality. Yeah, it's got to be a misprint. It has to mean, to say, hence there is no doubt that there exists a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, and it exists both in the understanding and in reality. So a very difficult argument, I suppose, tricky. I mean, it's a short argument, but it's interesting. I mean, it starts with a premise, which is a questionable premise, I suppose, that we can actually conceive of a being than which nothing greater exists. And then it argues that if we conceive of that being a mere idea, that is, an idea that exists in the understanding, but not something that exists in reality, we involve ourselves in hopeless contradiction. So that if we can conceive of such a being, it must exist in reality also. That's an argument that, I don't know, it has prompted volumes and volumes of arguments from philosophers over the year. We'll look at the first one by a contemporary of Anselm Gounod, but just wanted to just go through this. It's a difficult argument, so I didn't want to just leave it to you to do it by yourself. Just, something to think about.